Name ist Inke Arns, ich bin die Direktorin des HMKV und ich freue mich wahnsinnig. I'm super delighted to have Erika Balsom with us and Thomas Venker, Erika will first give a lecture and then Thomas Venker will have a discussion with her and with you, everybody together. Aber ich wollte eigentlich diese kleinen einführenden Worte auf Deutsch machen. Die Veranstaltung heute Abend findet statt im Rahmen der Ausstellung Holding Pattern. Holding Pattern läuft derzeit im HMKV, Hardware Medienkunstverein, ist kuratiert von Tom McCarthy und Anne-Hilde Nesset, eine Übernahme aus Oslo, und es geht um im weitesten Sinne Bewegungsmuster. Und einer der Künstler in dieser Ausstellung ist Harun Farocki, von dem wir dort oben die unglaublich tolle Installation Deep Play zeigen. Da geht es um das Finale der Fußball-Weltmeisterschaft 2006 im Olympiastadion, sozusagen durch die Perspektive von 12 Kameras. Und ich denke, dass wir heute wir haben versucht, also Veranstaltungen quasi zu jeder künstlerischen Position in der Ausstellung zu organisieren, und eben zu Harun Farocki haben wir Erika Balsom eingeladen, weil sie wirklich diejenige ist, die die Arbeit von Harun Farocki, ist wahrscheinlich eine der besten Kennerinnen weltweit der Arbeit von Harun Farocki, und die eben uns Auskunft geben wird über die letzte unvollendete Arbeit von Harun Farocki. Die ganze Veranstaltung findet auf Englisch statt, außer meine kleinen einführenden Worte. Und was ich auch gerne noch sagen würde, ist, dass diese Veranstaltung ist Teil der Reihe Kleiner Freitag des Dortmunder U, und ja, wir freuen uns über diese Kooperation. Jetzt würde ich gerne die beiden Gäste vorstellen. Erika Balsom, die gleich das Podium erklimmen wird. Sie ist Dozentin für Filmstudien am King's College in London. Sie ist Autorin von 4 Büchern, darunter After Uniqueness, A History of Film and Video Art in Circulation, 2017 bei Columbia University Press erschienen, und 10 Skies, Firefly Press 2021. Ihre Texte sind in Zeitschriften wie Cahiers du Cinéma, CinemaScope, eFlux, Grey Room, New Left Review und Screen erschienen. Zusammen mit Hila Pelek ist sie die Herausgeberin von Documentary Across Disciplines. Das ist eine Publikation, die 2016 bei MIT Press erschienen ist. Und in den Jahren 2023 war sie Co-Kuratorin von No Master Territories, Feminist, Worldmaking and the Moving Image. Das war eine großartige Ausstellung im HKW in Berlin und auch im Museum für moderne Kunst in Warschau. So viel zu Erika, die uns gleich Einblicke geben wird in Moving Bodies. Und Thomas Venker, freuen wir uns auch sehr darüber. Thomas Venker wird den Abend moderieren. Er ist Mitherausgeber und Co-Chefredakteur des Kaput Magazine für Insolvenz und Pop und Co-Kurator der Konzertserien Köln ist kaputt und Talking kaputt. Ich finde diese Titel wahnsinnig toll. Großartig, Thomas. Bevor er 2014 Kaput, also das Magazin für Insolvenz und Pop, gründete, war er 14 Jahre lang Chefredakteur des Intro-Magazins. Und wie ich aus seiner Biografie gelernt habe, zu jener Zeit war das Deutschlands auflagenstärkstes Magazin, das wusste ich nicht. Er schreibt regelmäßig für verschiedene Zeitschriften und Tageszeitungen. Er moderiert Panels und Symposien und er unterhält auch ein Kunstschallplattenlabel, die Edition Fieber, und gehört zum kuratorischen Team der Monheim-Triennale, über die wir gerade noch gesprochen haben. Er lehrt außerdem Musikjournalismus und Künstlermarketing an mehreren deutschen Universitäten und er hat auch ein Buch veröffentlicht. Zuletzt ist Talking to Americans im Ventil Verlag in Mainz erschienen. Und ich bin sehr froh, Thomas, dass du zu uns gekommen bist aus Köln, trotz der 3 Löcher im Sprunggelenk mit Krücken. Nicht weiter sagen, weil eigentlich gehörst du ins Bett, aber er war heute schon den ganzen Tag in der Ausstellung und wir freuen uns sehr. We are very happy to have you both here and I'm very much looking forward to this evening and to learn new things. Dankeschön. Und eine Sache noch, während Erika auf das Podium geht. Wir haben ein umfangreiches Filmprogramm mit Filmen von Harun Farocki organisiert. Im Sweet 16, im Juni und Juli, jeden Freitagabend. Ich weiß, die Konkurrenz zu Sommer am U ist groß. Aber dieses Filmprogramm umfasst Filme, die Sie wahrscheinlich noch nie von Harun Farocki gesehen haben. Nämlich alles das, was nicht auf dieser DVD-Edition drauf ist. Also jeden Freitag um 19 Uhr, wir sehen uns im Sweet 16. Danke.
Thank you, Erika, for this really stimulating lecture. I also have to say I was reading your essay or the text this was based on twice before to prepare here, and there's so many different angles to go in that it's quite difficult to decide where to go and where to start. So I decided not to start with what I originally was thinking as a starting point, because you mentioned it before from your talk in 2014 with him and in your last words and starting the 4th chapter, thinking about that computer-generated images are taking over. And he had like this kind of a little bit romantic idea of what could film be then there? What was his hope, would be my first question.
I mean, this is sort of the brilliance of Farocki, is that he doesn't tell you. He asks you the question, and then you sort of have to come up with answers yourself. So I don't know what his hope would have been, but I think I can tell you maybe what mine, or what I think about when I listen to his questions. I think that a lot of the discussion today around computer-generated images and computer-manipulated images comes down to an idea of trustworthiness, like, can we know that what we're seeing is real? I would say that the role of lens-based images is not to say this is really real. I think that this would be extremely naive. So I would, put an X through that option. What I think I was trying to bring out in the talk is that the lens-based image can give us a relationship to contingency and to particularity. Even if we have a digital image that is rendered in absolute detail, we know that it does not refer back to anything that really existed. It's like in our knowledge of the way the image is produced. And I think that viewer knowledge is as important as what the image looks like when we're thinking about what kind of affective relationship we have with images. So to me, this idea of the sort of aimless detail or the contingent movement that is unplanned, to me, these are things that now appear more important in film than ever. And I would say, it isn't just my personal taste or idea. If we look, for instance, at why slow cinema has been so popular in the 21st century, I think this is part of it, because many of those films are dealing with long take formats that are asking the viewer to sort of bear witness to the qualitative movements and contingencies of the world in a way that is not about the man-made or the planned, That's maybe where I would begin.
I stick to my interpretational parts now, also from something I didn't really hear in the text when I was reading it, but when you were going over it in the lecture, I thought like at one point we have the computer-generated images and we don't know, can we trust our eyes anymore? Is this the real thing? And then there's this kind of like, okay, that's why maybe I keep sticking to documentation. I see it like happening, but then again, do I see it happening? It could be also wrong. And there's a lot of pessimism in his work and a lot of like, okay, the world is not gonna get better in that way. But what I thought, like, as he was thinking things so early on, and like you see him like being a decade earlier with his thoughts, like if we can all manipulate pictures, we can maybe also manipulate them in the purpose of the underclass, the working class, because like the documentation camera, like the general documentation camera in supermarkets and like in companies are to control the workers. But if we can computer-generated images, the workers can also manipulate the computer-generated images. Did you find some evidence that he was thinking about that next level of how you can tricks with the power game again?
I don't think he was interested in that question of like manipulation, because he might say, well, all images are manipulated. You know, images are fabricated. Technically, there's always some level of manipulation. I think he was more interested in thinking about the use of images in these training contexts. There, at least in the research that exists, and maybe to explain, you know, the research that exists is a series of folders on his final laptop. And so this was how I did this research. I went to his apartment, I sat at a table, and I looked through these folders on his laptop. So, you know, it's a collection of materials that are organized a little, but, you know, he didn't really produce so much commentary on them. There's just a series of emails that he exchanged with his collaborators. So it's very difficult, you know, to really like draw so many conclusions about what the project would have been. I think for me, I was most interested in thinking about how it opens up maybe different readings of the works that he did quite late in his life.
When you mentioned that you looked at the materials, did you also looked at the emails to his assistant and partner? Did you also talk to them, like trying to come closer and closer to what this could mean, or did you keep it by just looking at the materials?
Yeah, I was in touch with Matthias Reimann, you know, to say that I was like doing this research and was it okay if I quote from his email, but I didn't sort of interview him any further about their plans for the project, partially because it would be, I think, hugely wrong of me to think that I could ever know, no matter who I talked to or what I did, it would be wrong of me to think that I could somehow know what that work would have been. Because it's not as if there was an almost finished version. This was at a very early stage. And so, you know, I'm also doing a research project right now that centers on a film that was seized by the police and disappeared, you know? And maybe there are scholars who would say, aha, I'm going to find out really what that film is. With Moving Bodies and with this new project, it's not my attitude. My attitude is we can never know. However, it can push us in different directions, and we can make a kind of constellation of things around it, while it will always be kind of mysterious. And I think, you know, for me as a researcher, that's the only attitude to take.
Hearing that, why did you choose it as a researcher, as a topic?
Farocki died very suddenly, and I heard about this unfinished project. I had been very, very fascinated by parallel. And as I mentioned, the fourth part of Parallel is about bodily movement. And so I saw this immediately as a connection to this work that I thought was such a major work. And so I was just really curious, to see, and I didn't know when I began at what phase his research was. I didn't know if he had a script or quotations assembled or a rough cut. I didn't know what the state of the materials were. I just sort of had this idea that we needed more Farocki in the world, that he left us too soon, and that by writing about this unfinished project, it was a way of bringing it into public discussion a little bit more and kind of giving us more of him. In the end, I basically took some questions out of this research archive and then sort of projected them back onto Parallel, Labor in a Single Shot, and also Serious Games, which is another amazing work, observational work, that we'll be showing here later in the summer as well.
How different or how similar was ending this project from ending your normal projects? Because in a way, you don't have like the artist, you don't have like the work, so the ending point must be really difficult to find.
But we always work with partial knowledge, even when you have the film in front of you, I would say. There are things about it you will never know. And I feel like projects have a sort of like internal momentum. I try as best as I can to sort of push things as far as I can. I'm always like telling my students, you have to push it further. Susan Sontag said, the essence of thinking is but, so you're always trying to like, but, keep going. Question your own ideas, complicate them, push it further. But at a certain point, one has deadlines. You have to finish your piece of writing at a certain moment.
I see people writing already in their blogs in the audience, so I forgot to say that it's possible to have questions from the audience at every time here, so just show it to me and then the microphone is waiting for you. Until I see that, I keep asking, and maybe I go now to my first question on the paper, which was like, what is it that fascinates you about him as an artist, and what did make you, maybe was there first the fan like for his work and then the researcher, or was it like hand in hand always?
I was definitely a fan and an admirer of his work long before I actively began to research it. But I think that, Farocki's work is such a fascinating blend of theory and practice that definitely my fandom for his work was always bound up in the sense that he too is doing research through filmmaking. And I think that there are a lot of research-based art practices today that maybe, are like the children of Farocki, we could say. But sometimes that work is extremely didactic. And I think that one of the things that's very important about his work is that it has this sort of research-based element, this philosophical complexity, but actually he's always asking viewers to really think for themselves. And this is a combination that I love. I mean, I mentioned his observational work, but he's also, one of the great practitioners of the essay film. And this is a tradition of cinema that I, am deeply interested in, invested in, that I, teach classes on. And so he's a sort of towering figure in that field as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's a kind of admiration for his work that is inseparable from the sense that he's one of the great thinkers of the image, not just someone who is, making beautiful artworks.
you mentioned the researcher part and the lecturer, but he was also a film critic, as you were.
Yes, absolutely.
So I would be interested if you also think that that had an influence on the way he creates movies.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see for him, maybe there is a certain manner of thinking that he carries across, these different ways of working, but that the sort of output, is different in his film criticism. But so much of his work is also about the history of cinema. I mentioned the Lumiere a lot. I mean, he has multiple works that deal with the Lumiere, that deal with workers leaving the factory. So there's a profound sense of a historical consciousness informing his work. So it's not just theorizing the image, but it's also thinking historically about the roles that film has had. And I think that one of the very interesting things in his work is that he focused a lot on, I guess what he very influentially named operational images. And so these are images that don't just represent something. They're not primarily there to educate or to entertain. They have a job to do. And he focused for a very long time on this idea of images that are used to accomplish tasks. And this is something that now is everywhere in our lives. But he kind of got there earlier, I think, than most people in terms of seeing that this conception of the image as an image that has a function or executes an action, that this would become a kind of dominant way of thinking about images. So he also has this sort of a little bit like an oracular quality, he could see the future maybe more than most of us can.
And as we talk about moving bodies, we also talk about moving knowledge in the sense of that our knowledge changes. I wondered, especially for the process from the shift from the lens filmed film to the computer generated film, do you see different paradigms in his thinking that he at one point revisited the ideas and the timeline, because it seems like he's always so sure where it goes, and I wonder was he always that sure, or did you also find little tracks of okay, there was a doubt and he jumped back 3 points and then he made it the 4th point and then it looks again like a clear path, or is it just always there?
That's a really good question. I have the sense of there being a kind of remarkable consistency across his whole body of work. I can't at the moment think of examples where a later work sort of contradicts or pushes back against an earlier one. Often it's that a later work sort of further develops the proposals of an earlier work, but without sort of rejecting any of them. He does seem to have really an immense clarity of thought and a great consistency in his own position. And I think that, there are certainly ways of tracing sort of rough periods in his career or shifts in his practice, but I would say that the kind of continuities are much stronger than any of those shifts.
It's incredible, because also there's so much technology development which you have to have an eye on, because you never know what's going to happen there, or maybe because good science fiction writers often have that same talent that they come up with things which happen really 20, 30 years later, and then you say oh, now it sounds so normal, but back then it was really weird to already know that. How important was for him always to follow the technical discourse? Did you see that also in his mails, in his writings, that he was very, very...
I think he was definitely interested in technological change, but I would say that he was very skeptical of one of the dominant ways that technological change gets discussed today, which is that, we see the invention of a new technology and all of a sudden everything changes. You know, that is the sort of rhetoric of innovation and radical novelty that is very tied to like marketing and often has a certain level of like historical amnesia that comes with it. I think he was really interested in thinking about media histories as like a series of longer discontinuous developments, like this idea that when we look at 21st century motion capture, actually chronophotography in the 19th century already gives us tools for thinking about that later technological moment. You know, he's not someone who's saying, whoa, oh my goodness, now we have motion capture. It's like, no, there was already motion capture in, you know, the 1850s. You see, so, or 60s, 70s. But, you know, there's the sense that he's always looking for these sort of Vorbilder. And this is, I think, you know, what some people would say is like a media archaeological approach. You're looking for the deeper strata, you know, of media, rather than assuming that because the market tells you that something is brand new, shiny new, it is, you know. Often the new contains a lot of the old.
When you say the market, it's like a lot of the sources you mentioned is like high-tech stuff. Did you also follow like the capitalistic market, which is often like just like using corners of technology developments in that sense?
Using corners of...
Yeah, I mean, just like if you come to, you described it at one part in the lecture that the military uses. They're creating an environment which is obviously made that the soldiers who watch it don't even come up with the idea we can lose that, which is a limitation of the construction room. And capitalism has the same things. They don't want to have you like negative effects of products and stuff like that. So I'm interested in maybe then the environmental construction a little bit. Like,
I think in general, he was interested in seeing kind of parallels, parallels between and continuities between, say, military uses of media and entertainment uses of media. So in serious games, we see these training programs that American soldiers are using for preparing for war, and also after combat. Computer programs they're using for sort of post-traumatic stress and rehabilitation. And when you see these computer programs that they're using, they look exactly like video games. I mean, they are video games. And so in that sense, you know, what does it mean to see, you know, images that are so familiar from a sort of highly commodified entertainment context appearing also in US military training facilities, you know? So I think he's interested always in like making those connections because, of course, like, you know, there is always a political project for Farocki, always a kind of project of ideology critique, you know? So there is a sense that he's trying to help us see connections that actually we are often encouraged not to see, or that are often kind of hidden from us. And I remember once I was on a panel and someone was talking about Farocki's use of found footage and so on, and they said, if Farocki were alive now, do you think he would be a YouTuber? You know? And I tried to be polite in my answer, but I also sort of jumped a little bit because I just thought like, okay, no, you are completely misrecognizing. This is not like a fan on YouTube making a video essay about a filmmaker that he loves. His project is always a project of critique and of knowledge production. And so there's always this political gesture there.
Absolutely. And that's interesting because you said like at a few points already that he does not say exactly what's saying. He wants the audience to come up with the conclusion. So he had like a really high picture from his audience or the audience in general? He was a believer?
I think it's a tremendous respect for the audience and for different modes of engagement. It's also, of course, a refusal of didacticism, because if we think about, conventional documentary, if we think about Hollywood cinema, we are told what to think, and meaning is closed off, it is fixed, frozen, and so there's also, again, a real post-1968 kind of politics there about saying you are empowered to bring your own knowledge to this, to think your own thoughts. I will throw some things out to you, but then the rest is up to you. And this is, it's something also really that comes from Brecht, that it's not about delivering a message in a kind of propagandistic way. It's about sparking something in the spectator, who then goes off and does their own thinking. Maybe they, study more. It's an open work. In that sense, maybe every Farocki film is an unfinished film, that will be finished only by the spectator, who then goes away and starts to mull over the proposals of the film.
You referenced some of the locations and places his works were set, like prisons, shopping malls, soccer fields, war zones. Would you say this is each project just he's going for a certain environment, or was he thinking about an additional concept of these environments in the first place?
I think that there are films that combine different environments within a single film, like Leben, what's it called, Life in the Federal Republic, Leben, BRD. But many of these are interested in sites at which human behavior is being managed or modulated according to either social or technical apparatuses, right? So it's always about that kind of encounter between life and domination, really. And that can happen in lots of different places. So in that sense, he's not interested in the Playboy centerfold photo shoot in Ein Bild, just as an ethnography of, photographic production in 1983. He's also interested in that idea of how the glossy centerfold image gets made, and unfolding all of the different kinds of processes and power relations and contexts that actually go into making that image. So it's really a focus on work, which is one of the great themes across his entire filmography. He's interested in images of work and in the work of images. This is this kind of double focus, I think, that kind of brings together a lot of what he did.
And he's also interested in showing the people that an environment, a certain territory, is never what they think. It's just that. Prison is not just prison, or the soccer field, which is maybe a good environment to talk about, because it's also here in the exhibition, that the soccer field is so much more. It's one of the most capitalistic places we have in sports. It's also a control place, and with the timeline idea here, he's also questioning the continuity of time, because we see the one thing there, but while this is happening, we see the other things happening outside of the stadium and so on. So in a way, he loads also a lot on his audience.
Absolutely. It's very demanding work, very rich work, but I think he is always interested in kind of breaking apart received ideas. You think you know what this thing is? Actually, no. That's just a kind of surface level feature. I'm interested in kind of cracking this thing open and showing actually all of the component parts, how it works, what it is. So again, it's really about, I think, the desire to produce knowledge of the world, and to the essence of thinking is but, like keep going. Don't take the thing at first glance, but try to understand it in its complexity. Which is not normally what happens, when we think about what role moving images fulfill in our life. They tend to simplify things, not to sort of allow us to appreciate their complexity.
Was he also, to a certain degree, a dreamer? Because or somebody who has like a romantic hopes. Because when you talked about these helping lines, I had also to think about that in classic film, we always know there's this blind spot, what happens between the images, and often like when DVD technique came up, we found out like what was really happening, because we could suddenly watch frame. Oh my God, now I see things which I never saw before. So in a way, when you talked about the helping lines, I was wondering if you also like that idea that there was always this dot, but there was something in between, which is like, maybe the world is not as bad because in that between something can happen.
I mean, I think that Farocki's work is absolutely in a tradition of critique, and critique is by its very definition grounded in negativity. So that's one thing. He's not making films that are imagining radical utopias. I mean, there are lots of moving image artists today who I think have sort of abandoned the project of critique, who take up a much more reparative mode, and they're interested in producing images that sort of imagine radically other worlds. I don't think that's, what Farocki is doing, but the mere fact that he made the kind of films that he made, to me, has a utopian element in it. I mean, it's what Annette Michelson called the radical aspiration of filmmaking. The idea that you can take an industrial medium that is so closely tied to mass entertainment, capitalism, propaganda, and that you can somehow, from that very same institution, that very same machine, kind of wrest it away from those things so that it turns back on itself and opens a possibility of a different kind of image, a different kind of thought, a different kind of relationship to the viewer. In that act, I think there is something profoundly hopeful. And even utopian. But I think that, at the level of what we see in Farocki's films in terms of content, it's dark. I mean, it is a world picture of domination, of catastrophe, of war. So, the subjects that he takes up are not uplifting most of the time, although there are a few exceptions to that.
But listening to your words and looking at the movies, there's also it's a little bit pathetic maybe to say a deep love for the humans in there, but the way, especially when it's documented and when he questions like the continuity of like seeing the movements, and one person does the movement, but then it gets generalized. There's a lot of this one person in the work too, right? Which is like, in a way, like if this stands as an essence of a work, it's a statement like we are humans and we are all singular. That's also a big part of his work.
Yeah, I mean, labor in a single shot, I think, really gets to that. Like, what is labor? There are so many different kinds of activities that fall under that category, but often we don't see that range of work. We see very limited kind of stereotyped examples of what work means in 2014. And so then, again, to sort of crack that open, to reveal this sort of complexity of what can count as work, but then to sort of take this sort of simple but very sustained look at that working process, again, like this is something that is absolutely in opposition to our normal relationship to representation and to images, you know, that we would witness what it looks like to watch someone sweep the floors for several minutes. Just that, no explanation, but just the registration of that action, to witness it in its duration, in its particularity. I mean, this is something for me that is like a profoundly kind of ethical situation where we have to sort of recognize a kind of relationship, on the one hand, to otherness and to alterity, to situations and people that we do not know and that will never be with us, but also, on the other hand, that we do share a world together, you know, that this is an encounter with a kind of common world.
Do you feel, as the researcher who watched most of his works, and do you understand when he felt the need to comment, when he put his voice on it, when there was a narrative on top of his works, and when not? When he used to, do you have a certain feeling that you understand his momentums of choice there?
I would say that in a way, the commentary is always there. It just happens through different means. So in some instances, the voice has to be there to give the commentary. Like in parallel, you have all these images from video games, and you have the voiceover that comments on them. But in other instances, Farocki finds things to film that contain within them their own kind of commentary, and by the fact of filming it and by the fact of framing it in the way that he does, they sort of comment on themselves. And here I'm thinking of his many examples of filming situations of role-playing, management, or even like ein Bild, like he is filming the production of an image. So there's already there a sort of meta commentary on the work of image production. So in that sense, you know, the voiceover maybe is not so necessary because there's already a level of criticality or reflexivity that's built in to seeing one camera look at another camera. You see? In terms of, you know, this opposition between commentary and not commentary, there are also examples in which, you know, you get a bit of both, like in Serious Games. It's in 4 parts. 3 parts have no commentary. And then in the 4th part, you see images from the first 3 parts reappearing, but now with intertitles with text commenting on them. So I think he's also interested in, you know, multiple ways of creating sort of critical frames through which images can be read.
Do you feel like this last work would have been a commentary work, or is this speculative field you don't want to?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely didn't find any drafts of like a voiceover script or anything like that. All that I know is that it was planned on as being a double projection work. So in a way, we can already say that there's a potential of commentary through this act of juxtaposition already. You know, maybe also there would have been a voiceover. One can't say.
I look in the audience if anybody has a question here. Now I see a hand, yes.
So first of all, thank you very much for this very interesting lecture and the talk afterwards. I just want to come back to the part of the empowerment of the audience and the critique of ideology. I'm just wondering how it is achieved within film aesthetics for Harun Farocki. Well, I would say it's not part of the inner quality of the images or of the ontology of the images, but it's more part of the combination of images. So he maybe is more likely to follow the path of Godard or Eisenstein, where they say one image and another image is not a second image, it's a third image, which is an imaginary image. So it's a dialectic understanding of combination of image and of course of commentary of itself. So yeah, that's my question. How is philosophy there?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, your comment is a perfect description of the essayistic strain in Farocki's work. I think the observational films don't work that way, you know, because they really are depicting a single environment with some continuity, you know, so even if there are cuts, there's a continuity of space and time that is like holding the work together. But of course, he is best known as an essay filmmaker. And in those cases, it's exactly about acts of juxtaposition, combination, building these constellations. And when I'm teaching the essay film, one of the texts I always assign for my students is Adorno's The Essay as Form, which is not a text about essay filmmaking, but about the literary essay. But it has a lot of relevance to essay filmmaking and to Farocki in particular, because the idea is that the essay is an anti-fascist form in the sense that it refuses instrumental reason and it refuses all received ideas. So Adorno says that the person who is like writing an essay must act like one who reads in a foreign language without the use of a dictionary. So what does this mean? Well, it means that instead of looking up the concrete definition of the word, meaning arises only through context, only through relation. And so this is exactly this, 1 + 1 = 3, maybe, idea that you mentioned. So this idea of creating, Adorno calls it a force field. He says there's no scaffolding, there is a force field in which things are resonating with one another. And I think that, there are lots of great examples of Farocki doing this. And I think it's one of the reasons also why he was so drawn to work in an installation form later in his life. Of course, one can say TV funding in Germany was drying up, and there are financial benefits to working in the art world. But I think this idea of being able to have montage happening as a montage of simultaneity, where two images are coexistent in space, also a very Godardian thing from Numero 2 and so on. This was something that was very interesting to him in terms of finding, a spatial way of articulating this montage structure. So that's definitely there. But I guess, in a way, so much of what I said tonight is almost asking us to think about the fact that there is another Farocki, who is not in conflict with this one, but who is maybe less discussed than the essayistic Farocki, and is in, this idea of Farocki, the observational filmmaker. To me, it's very fascinating because it seems to sit on the other side, the filmmakers who put their faith in montage, the filmmakers who put their faith in reality. But for him, these things are absolutely reconcilable, and so that's also, I think, really interesting to find a deeper unity within the practice.
Do I see another question in the room? I don't think so. I think you gave a great lecture. We talked a lot, and now it's up to you all to watch all these movies here within the next weeks and find the other Farocki.
I'm very jealous that you have access to seeing all these films in a cinema very soon. I think it's an immense privilege. One can watch them, on DVD and so on, but I think it's something really different to sit absolutely undistracted and really kind of take them in. So consider yourselves lucky.
Thank you, Erika, for coming
Thank you,
over from
Thomas.
London and the lecture and the talk. It was a pleasure. And thank you all for coming.